Thank you for joining me here on Rule of Law. Today what I want to talk about is using AI art in your D&D or other role-playing game. Now the one I'm going to be looking at is Midjourney, and that's because that's the one I have access to. I'm on the waiting list for proper DALL-E 2, but I'm not in yet, so I can't really look at that at this stage. But let's have a look at this, and because I'm a lawyer, I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the legalities. There's some legal issues that come up with this as well. So first, Midjourney actually operates as a Discord bot, which is kind of interesting. Now, they run their own Discord server where you can access the bot, and if you want to just try it out, you can go there as a free user and have a look. They'll give you a certain amount of images that you can generate. Now, as a paid user, you also have the option to invite that Discord bot onto your own server, which is nice because that way you're not sort of being spammed by all the other things that other people are creating. Lots of people are creating stuff. Some of it's really fascinating, but maybe you just want to see your stuff if that's what you're if you're trying to sort of pay attention to it. I find it's kind of hard to keep up with the fire hose of content of stuff that's on Midjourney servers. But it basically works with you giving it a prompt. So you can just start with imagine. Now, you can give it sort of anything, and you may or may not have a specific thing in mind. So for instance, you might say, man in his 40s with long gray hair, clean shaven, red shirt. Sort of a vague description of myself. Now, I don't know what this is going to end up looking like. It does take some time as it generates. I will note here as well, they have two sort of modes. They have fast mode, which is faster, and they have relaxed mode. And relaxed mode basically says, but you can do this when you've got some spare time, but it's not a priority. And the reason why there's that distinction is that the distinction or the fast mode, you have a limited number of fast mode hours per month if you're on a paid subscription. And that they give you lots of them on that paid subscription, but it is still a limit. It just sort of limits how much you can do. Now, one thing I will point out here is that if you were watching that image as it was growing, you can see it change. You can see it sort of shift as it goes. All right, so this is what it comes up with as our first images. And you can see that some of these are better than others. This one in the top left, I don't have much use for. But some of these others are not awful, although you can see that it does kind of have some problems around the eyes. All right, but you've got a few options. You can upscale any of these images. This initial set that it gives you is kind of like a menu of options. It doesn't do a whole lot of processing on them, but it is a sort of initial subset of things to choose from. So let's say if I like, I don't know, let's go with 2 as a starting place. I can ask it for variations. This V2 button will say, I want to see some more things based on this image. So now it's coming up with this. Now, you'll note that it doesn't necessarily give you what you want. I asked for a red shirt because I'm wearing a red shirt. But what it has given me is a gray shirt with sort of a red collar. Okay, fair enough. You're not, this isn't something like hiring an artist where you can ask for something very specific. You're kind of just going to get what it gives you here. Now, again, you can see that the eyes are where it struggles, but I can now go and I can say, let's say if I like this one at the bottom here, I can tell it to upscale that. And so now it's going to take some time to upscale that. I'm just showing you this. This is on fast mode, and I'm showing you this in real time right now. Later on, I might sort of speed up a little bit, but just so you can get an idea of how long this takes. How much time are you going to be dedicating to this if you're trying to generate something? So you can see here, it's not terribly slow on the fast mode. It's actually not that bad on the relaxed mode either. We'll try that out in a moment as well. But so it's at 67%. You can sort of see the development as it goes. 77%. You can see it's kind of changing shape here. One thing I will note about the upscaling that is worth noting is that upscaling doesn't just improve the quality. It is actually redesigning it. And this can be a problem sometimes because sometimes you might see something. At one point, I was trying to generate a sort of villainous character, and one of the images that was on the sort of small thing had this perfect villain smirk, like an it was just wonderful, this perfect facial expression. And then when I upscaled it, it turned that into a very sort of warm smile, which was not what I wanted at all. I wanted that smirk. I wanted the villain to look evil and menacing. And instead they ended up kind of looking friendly, like somebody you might, you know. So that was not, not ideal, and there really isn't a sort of way to deal with it. Now, again, you can see the eyes aren't quite perfect, but in terms of providing somebody, with an image as a character image, I wouldn't be upset with the ability to use this kind of as a character reference handout. So that's, again, I started off sort of picking some features of myself, just looking here at the mirror or, at my webcam reflection here. This doesn't really look terribly like me. There are some similarities, but so you can't sort of pick and choose. If I went to an artist and said, draw a, an image of me, this probably isn't what they would come up with, but it might be if I gave them my very sparse kind of prompts that I gave here. But we can try this again with another sort of NPC idea. So, bald man, wide red nose, and glasses. Just to, as an idea for, this could be a shopkeeper, this could be whatever it is we want to use. So now we can see it's, again, sort of taking some time as it's generating. Now I can already see one of them has sunglasses, which, unless I'm playing a modern game, probably wasn't what I was thinking. One in the bottom left seems to also be wearing a suit, which might not be what I was thinking. And now I don't know what it's doing here in terms of some of these images. I think it's coming up with wide red nose, and in some of these cases, I think it's thinking clown nose. So it has a different idea on some of these than I had. Yeah, I'm not sure that any of these are any good. Yeah, I don't think I like any of these. We'll just call this a sort of failed prompt. But let's try. Let's see. A young dwarf with a braided beard. Just to try a fantasy prompt here, like a proper fantasy prompt, and see what it comes up with. One thing I will note here is you've already seen not everything that comes out of it is a winner by any stretch. And so you're going to have to play with it a little bit. That's one reason why I like sort of showing this to you at real-time speeds, because that way you can get an idea of how much time this is going to take up. Because if you're like me, when you're trying to run an adventure, time is at a premium. It's hard to find the time to generate, to sort of set this up. And young, it seems to have gone a little younger than I was thinking. I was thinking young adult, but of course I didn't tell it that. So this is on me. Garbage in, garbage out is very much a thing with these. So you have to sort of learn a little bit about what it is going to think and go from there. Because what I've got are things that look kind of like kids with beards. All right, so let's try this again. A young dwarven man with a braided beard. It also didn't seem to really braid the beards, it braided their hair. This is a problem that Midjourney often has. It sometimes has a very hard time parsing out where adjectives should go. So the descriptor of braided, I'm thinking should apply to beard, and it's just hearing braided and applying that to the hair. This can be a challenge sometimes when you're just trying to find the right phrase to get Midjourney to cooperate in some fashion that generates something that's useful. All right, now we can already see our images. I like this a lot better in terms of what we're getting. Um, I'm not sure it's doing all right on the braiding yet, but doing pretty good. I mean, I would not be upset to see any of these so far as possible images here. All right, almost done on this. All right, I think this one in the bottom right is a pretty good one. I'm also going to upscale the one on the bottom left. Just, I think those are my, you know what? I'm also going to do the one on the top left. We're just going to get and you can sort of get a variety of options here. Now, anything you don't use for a particular NPC you were thinking of, you could use later. Now you can see it does have the ability to do a certain amount of parallel processing, which is also kind of nice. It will limit you to, I think, about 3 images on the go at once, but that can also speed up your sort of workflow here. Now there's a few other sort of caveats here, which is that Midjourney is borrowing all of this from sort of stuff out in the world. And so sometimes that can create some real interesting issues and limitations. So here's our first sort of completed image. I don't think that's half bad. Here's another one. Seems pretty solid to me. I mean, again, looks a little young, but certainly passes as an adult. I think this is our sort of standout winner here, though. This would make a pretty decent, you know, if somebody's going and encountering a dwarven shopkeeper and this is the face you put up, you're not going to get, you're not going to get too much flack from your players. But let's give a little example here as to some of the problems that you can run into, because I ran into this earlier when I was trying to generate just some ideas for what Gimlet, my gnome on Lawyers and Dragons. I know I bring that up a fair bit, but it's the game I'm playing in at the moment. But, you know, so if I just go a thin-faced gnome, brown hair, and we'll just try that. So let's just see what it comes up with this. And we're going to need a few tries on this. There's going to be some amusement. Okay, so here are our images. All right, now one thing is my sort of thought about, you know, Gimlet and his sort of, the idea is not somebody wearing a pointed hat. So we're going to try here. Revising our prompt. Thin-faced gnome, brown hair, no hat. And we're going to see what it does with this. Okay, so you saw how I said no hat? Well, it's still coming up with hats. I haven't been able to find any way to get Midjourney to recognize the idea of a gnome without a hat. And that's just because gnome is going to have a strong association in its sort of database with lawn gnomes. And so every gnome entry that I put in comes out with a pointy hat. And I don't want the pointy hat, but I don't know a way around this short of hiring an actual artist for it. So I had already recorded this video when I dug into the documentation and found a feature I'd been missing, which is the no addendum. And so what this allows you to do is to basically put in an element that the drawing should not include. So I thought I'd try this out with the whole idea of I need a gnome with no hat. And this is what I got. So not a hat, but these gnomes all have a different color of hair that is in a very characteristically pointy shape. So I guess you can get a gnome with no hat, but you're going to get a gnome with some sort of hat thing made out of hair. Yeah, that's just a limitation of the AI. This is just how it sees gnomes, and it has no other way to be. So I just wanted to toss that in there, because otherwise somebody will be going, what about the no feature? Well, this is what it gets you. But it does do decently well at items. So let's try this on a magical potion that explodes. I'm just thinking sort of something that I might hand out in an adventure that, you know, some sort of flask containing an explosive substance that a character could throw and use as some form of attack. So this way I could add this as part of sort of an item card or a little handout in an adventure, or if I'm playing online, an image that I can put up so that people have a better idea of what they've just found. So we can see here it's sort of generating a bunch of options. One of them kind of looks like a lighthouse at this stage. But you can see it's getting a lot better as we go. All right, so these options all look pretty good to me. I'm just going to upscale a few of these and we'll sort of fast forward through. Okay, so these that we've got are all mostly excellent. I'm not sure about this thing where it looks like it's blowing the cork off. That's probably not what I'm looking for, but I can't say that the image isn't bad. This I think is just kind of fascinating. I like the sort of smoky effect around it. It's one of those things that I think it draws interest. This just looks really cool. And similarly, I mean, I'm not sure what's going on with this in terms of, what's happening there, but it looks all of these I think would be perfectly good images. Now, I'm just going to pick this one and we can do a further upscale. And I'm just going to show this one in real time. It's going to take a few moments, but just so that you can get an idea again of what it looks like if you want to upscale it to the maximum level. And this is on the fast mode. They don't actually let you use relax mode time to upscale to max. I'm not sure why that is, but it is what it is. So we're just seeing it's up to 14%, and as it upscales, it sort of loses initially its definition, but some of the stuff that comes out of this is really amazingly beautiful. And I think this is a pretty good example. Like some of these images, um, even if I don't really, even if this isn't what I'm looking for in terms of that cork blowing off, the colors on this are just fascinating. I'm really, I'm liking this image, or I'm liking these sets of images here. Like, I'm not sure what that sort of swirling in the orange is, but it certainly attracts attention. So this is it at 78%. And it's up to 85%. 94%. And there we go. So that's, and this has got sort of a painted pastel kind of look to it. I think that this is a perfectly usable image for something to hand out as, if the players have found a bunch of these items, I can say this is what it looks like. Now, it doesn't necessarily do as well on everything. So one of them that I've had a lot of trouble with is lockpicks. I just can't get this thing to generate a set of lockpicks that is even close to save my life. It's just, I'm not sure where it's drawing from in terms of its designs, but it just doesn't really get the idea. So it's not going to be usable for everything. This is actually, I think, coming closer to it than it has ever before. Yeah, none of these are even close to what lockpicks look like, so that's not super helpful. We can also look at some other places where it can generate some weird entries. So let's just try an ice sword. So if I want to generate something like a Frostbrand sword or something like that, some magical ice sword. All right, so the issue we can see here is that it's really not doing a very good job at the sort of fundamental concept of a sword shape. We don't really have maybe the bottom right one has kind of a handle, but by and large, these are sort of blade more than anything. We can just get some variations on the bottom right and see what that looks like. All right, so we're doing a little bit better here. And you know what? I think I like this top left one. I think that that is viable as an image, but you can see it may take some playing around in terms of getting what you want. All right, so what we end up with here, I think this is decent enough. I mean, I don't know that this necessarily looks super sharp, and sharpness is kind of something I associate with a sword, but it's got the sword shape, and I mean, if you handed this out in a casual game as a sort of as an image for what people found, I don't think that they'd be too inclined to give you grief over that. Uh, so there is a lot of potential here. There are some things where it just really doesn't do well, but by and large, you've got a lot of options, and this can really increase the ability that you have to make your world feel real. It also does a pretty good job on landscapes. So So cave entrance, ominous, mountain, uh, stream running through. So just it's an idea for a cave entrance. I've said ominous, mountain, stream running through it. I don't know what I'm going to get here, but this might be something that I can use as an image to show where the dungeon is. Like this might be an idea for where the adventure is going to take place. So let's have a look at what it gives us here. All right, so none of them are exactly what I was looking for in terms of like these Skyrim sort of. You'll often see like a cave entrance with a stream flowing out of it in Skyrim, but I don't necessarily, you may not get what you want, but you might get something that is as good or that you can sort of play off of. So I'm just upscaling the one image there because it looks like it's got a good cave entrance and it's got a stream element to it. So let's see what it gives us. I think this is actually pretty awesome. I mean, we've got what looks like a dungeon entrance next to this stream. It's got a pretty neat style to it, but in terms of getting the style, you can give it suggestions like I want this to look like a particular painter or something like that. Um, but so you've got those options, but I think this looks pretty cool. This looks to me like if a great place to start an adventure. Now it isn't really what I was looking at in terms of I was thinking that the stream would be coming out of the cave. But again, I don't really know how to tell Midjourney that in a way that it's necessarily going to understand. And I mean, right now, I'm actually lucky enough that this sort of rocky outcropping in front of that opening actually kind of suggests that maybe there could be stream in there coming out of that cave as well and joining the existing stream. Or maybe this existing stream could be flooding that cave to a certain degree. So all of those are kind of options. And I'm perfectly happy with this. Midjourney does pretty good at landscapes, certain kinds of items, but again, not so good on others. And mostly it does pretty well on portraits. It may not, as mentioned, I couldn't get it to do a gnome without a hat. No matter how emphatic I am about no hat, it'll put a hat on a gnome. That's how it rolls. It thinks that's the nature of the universe. All right, so the next thing I want to look at here is talking a little bit about copyright issues and so forth, because I'm running a YouTube channel here, and so I've got to worry about that kind of thing. And also, I'm a lawyer, so when I see that there's potential issues there, I want to talk about them. So when you sign up, there's a contract here that is basically part of signing up to use the service. Now, this contract is, again, none of this is going to be legal advice. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer, and I'm certainly not in your jurisdiction or anything like that. So if this is a situation where you need advice, you should talk to an intellectual property lawyer in your area. But they have a number of things here. One is just a disclaimer of sort of quality. Basically, they say, hey, listen, we can't promise anything about what it spits out. We can't promise it's going to be useful. We can't promise it's going to be good. We can't promise it's not going to infringe somebody's trademark or something like that, because you could absolutely end up with something where you plug in, say, a restaurant, and it decides to spit out the golden arches because it's, and I can't say that it would or wouldn't. I haven't tried this, but I could certainly imagine this as a possibility. They reserve the right to ban you for any reason and at any time, which, all right, not surprising. They note that you can't use the services for competitive research, which, again, not surprising. You can't try to build your own bot using this, and you may not use automated tools to access, interact with, or generate assets through the services. That might be relevant to you if you're trying to, for certain applications. All right, so carrying on here, they have age requirements. They want you to be at least 13 years. And they note that they try to make it family friendly, but they can't promise that it's not going to spit out something inappropriate. They do make efforts to keep it from doing that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go. So copyright and trademark. So they note here, shall refer to a customer, or paid member refers to a customer who's, paying them through their process. And they note, by using the services, you grant to Midjourney its successors and assigns a perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive, sub-licensable, no-charge, royalty-free, irrevocable copyright license to reproduce, prepare derivative works of, publicly display, publicly perform, sub-license, and distribute text and image prompts you input into the services or assets produced by the service at your direction. And they note that it survives termination of the agreement by any party for any reason. Now, you quite possibly, and I say possibly because it's not necessarily clear which of these image prompts have sufficient, creativity to them to have a copyright interest, you might, if you had a sufficiently long and complex image prompt, and it may not take much for that, but again, talk to an IP lawyer if you're in a situation where that's an issue. You might have a copyright interest in those image prompts, and they're saying, well, we get to reuse those. Now, interestingly, they are essentially saying that these images are covered under copyright, and the US Copyright Office actually takes a different view of that. The US Copyright Office has said that they don't think, in their view, which I don't think has been tested in the courts at this stage, but that's their view, that AI-generated art can hold a copyright. So it might be that they're saying, if there's a copyright in this, then we get these things, which is perfectly prudent, but they also are going to try to enforce a copyright that may or may not exist. And again, talk to a lawyer if this is a thing there. So subject to the above license, you own all assets you create with a service, but doesn't apply if you fall under the exceptions below. And the exception number 1 is non-paid members license terms. So what they're claiming is that if you are a free user, that you only have a license under Creative Commons non-commercial attribution international license, which means you would also have to refer back to Midjourney. Now, again, I don't know that there's any actual copyright interest that attaches to these images, but certainly Midjourney is claiming that there is. So they say that if you are a free user and you generate images, that you are required to A, only use them in non-commercial senses, which right now this channel isn't monetized, so is that non-commercial? But if it later becomes monetized, does it become commercial? And they want you to attribute your images to Midjourney. Again, whether or not you're going to have to actually do those things will depend on whether there is a copyright that attaches. talk to a lawyer if this is something that comes up. But it's really interesting from my perspective, looking at all of this. There's also something that if you are an employee or owner of a company with more than $1 million in gross revenue, and you are using the services to benefit your employer or company, then you have to purchase a corporate membership. So, and I think the corporate membership is like 600 a year. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, they want you to pay more if you're earning $1 million a year. Fair enough. They also note that what is it? That there's an option for a private mode. Now, private mode still, this is another aspect, which is that they don't actually, everything you generate goes up on a web page unless you pay extra for them to be private. Now, in my case, I'm not super concerned about that, but you might be depending on what you're doing, especially if there is no copyright that assigns, then anything that gets sort of publicly shared, somebody else could use potentially in a potentially commercial way. So again, check with a lawyer if this is something that is significant or matters to you. They have a DMCA policy. There's some other interesting aspects. If you have an unlimited service, they can still rate limit you eventually. Now, there's also some community guidelines that these are things that will get you banned. And so don't create images or use text prompts that are inherently disrespectful, aggressive, or otherwise abusive. No adult content or gore. Now, gore is interesting because they just define this as like any sort of blood. Now, if you're trying to generate images for a fantasy game, you might at times want to generate things like that. And not because you're trying to shock people, but just because, in a Dungeons and Dragons game, people might, for instance, come across a dead body, something like that. And you might, or you might want to be running a murder mystery in another game. And so, if you're trying to figure out who killed Mr. Body in the conservatory and with what weapon, well, then it might be relevant to have an image of, of the dead guy. So they note that they will block some text inputs automatically. And in fact, their blocking is very aggressive, as I'll sort of point out here. They have a rule not to share other people's creations without their permission. Now, again, as I mentioned, the copyright issues are kind of up in the air, but they can still ban you for breaking their rules. So that is still an option that they have. Be careful about sharing. They say it's okay to share your creations outside of the Midjourney community, but please consider how others might view your content. I have no idea what that means. And any violations can lead to bans. So yeah. They also have this interesting limitation of liability and indemnity. And one of the things I think is really interesting here is they note, if you harm someone else or get into a dispute with someone else, we will not be involved. If you knowingly infringe someone else's intellectual property and that costs us money, we're going to come find you and collect that money from you. We might also do other stuff, like try to get a court to make you pay our attorney's fees. Don't do it. I'm a big proponent of natural language in contracts, and I believe that what they're trying to do here is trying to set up a proper indemnification clause. I don't actually know if this gets there. This might be a little too natural language and a little too casual, because we're going to come find you and collect that money from you doesn't sound like it's creating a legal obligation, but talk to a lawyer, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create an indemnification clause. I just don't know if they successfully do so. So why does all of this matter in the sense of, if you are running a D&D game? Because, I'm a lawyer. I find all of this stuff fascinating. But, so let's say you're using it as a free service and you don't want to you don't want to do attribution, because that can sometimes be a pain. If you post this online, if you write an adventure that uses some of these images and you've only used the free service, in theory, Midjourney could sue you. Same thing for if you share it on Twitter and you don't properly attribute it and these kinds of things. I don't know how litigious Midjourney is going to be, but it is something to be aware of, the possibility that they might do this. Now, all of this gets into what I like to call interesting legal questions, and my sort of usual maxim is that interesting means expensive. Uh, I don't know, the issue of can an AI generated image hold copyright is still one that it's going to be an issue that the courts are going to be grappling with for a while. I don't know that we're going to get a firm decision anytime soon while we're dealing with such an emerging technology. It's going to be an issue that gets litigated and then relitigated even after there's decisions on it, because people are going to try to change the court's minds in one way or another, either to say, this is an AI generated image, I get to use it no matter what, or my AI generated this image, I get to limit who gets to do what with it. Um, you probably don't want any part of that emerging litigation battle, so be careful. And again, talk to a lawyer if that's something you're looking at doing. But I did mention that they have these limitations on what you can do. And some of those, and I hope I don't get myself banned here, but I was trying to describe a hag, a Dungeons and Dragons, monster. Has its basis in mythology, so I was trying to say an evil old woman with warts. And here's what comes up. Banned word. The word warts is banned. Circumventing this filter to violate our results may result in your access being revoked. Warts is banned. So if you want to describe a toad that has a bunch of warts on it, you might have a problem with this. Other words that get banned are things like blood and so forth. So that can make certain images difficult to generate. And some of the time you might end up getting frustrated with this because, I mean, if you're trying to generate like a Halloween image of a witch, is this really causing, anybody any grief? Well, but again, it's their service. They've got the right to limit what you can do on it or not limit it as they see fit. Anyway, I think that there's a lot of potential for this. There's a lot of places where you can use this to add to your game in a real big way. You can give it you can give your players a better idea of things that they're looking at, things that they've found, NPCs that they've run into. Some issues that I can see with this, one of them is what I would call the named NPC problem. Normally you'll get certain kinds of players who'll go around and as they meet people in town, they'll ask you for their names. And, the idea is that then they can feel out whether or not you've actually generated a name for this particular NPC, because if you have, then they're probably somebody important, right? It's somebody that you've thought of. Now, I get around that personally when I'm running my games by just having a big old list of names. And so when they go up to the random shopkeeper and say, "What's your name, friend?" It's, "Oh, I'm Bob Bobson, third entry on my, list of names." And that way I can sort of make the world feel a little bit more real, but also keep that sort of gamification from creeping in, where people are trying to treat your game like a video game and less like an immersive experience. Because really, at its best, Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games are this kind of immersive experience where you can sort of blend into it. It feels real. Now, if you've got a bunch of images for NPCs, they might say, "Hey, do you have a picture of this shopkeeper?" And of course you don't, because, he's just some random guy who sells swords, and you haven't thought that far ahead. One of the ways you can get around that is not generating an image until afterwards. So you generate your images for people are going to be important, like, the king of whatever land, or the goblin that they're going to be facing, or that kind of thing. But you don't necessarily need to have images for everybody, because you can't have images for everybody, and then they can sort of feel around the edges of what you've prepared versus what you haven't. So using it less in some ways can be better for that, because you can always, if they keep coming back to the same shopkeeper, then you can later generate an image for them down the road. So that's sort of one consideration. As mentioned, you're not going to get exactly what you want out of this. You can get something pretty good, but it's not the same as hiring an artist. And I know there's going to be some artists who are upset by the use of some of these things. And frankly, I don't think that this is competing in a really big way with artists, because one of the things that that fantasy artists offer is that ability to do something very customized and very specific. If you have an idea for what that character looks like in your head, you can communicate that to the artist and get something that really feels personal and connected to you. Whereas Midjourney is just going to give you something ish. um, the other thing is that a lot of the stuff that Midjourney is best at, you're just never going to hire an artist for. Um, Art is expensive, and there's just no way that I'm, for some random throwaway adventure that I'm doing once for a group of friends, I'm not going to be able to say, okay, I need this image of what the dungeon entrance looks like. I would never hire somebody for that. And, if I'm handing out 5 different really interesting items on this lengthy adventure, there's no way I'd be hiring an artist to draw each of those 5 different images. It just would not be feasible. So that's not a market where it's competing with the artists. It's just providing something that you otherwise would never be able to use or enjoy. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of share that with you, give you a little bit of insight into this. If you haven't considered using this in your games, it can offer quite a bit. It does have its limitations, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the usefulness of this. I've subscribed to, Midjourney. I'm a paid member at this point. Um, I'm on the wait list for DALL-E 2. I think there's a lot of potential, and I just kind of wanted to share my experiences with you guys. And yeah, anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.